Well, welcome everybody. This is a webinar to sort of summarize the white paper on factors to consider in designing an African swine fever eradication plan. And the participants are the Tier 1 review group that's helped, has seen the drafts and helped make modifications. Let's see. So I'm going to couple of slides on background, then I'm going to hit the high points in the paper. There's a lot of detail in the paper. Everything needs discussion, but hit the big picture items. So again, this white paper assumes ASF has been detected and has not been eliminated despite intensive efforts during the emergency response stage. And the focus is on ASF elimination in domestic swine, not feral swine. That's a whole different topic we want to address. And the purpose of the white paper is to encourage discussion and consideration of important factors for ASF eradication amongst all regulatory officials and stakeholders. So this isn't intended to provide final answers, it's intended to provide discussion around various topics. And this project ended, and we have funding so that at the end of the year to deliver the white paper. So this is the white paper that's delivered, probably won't be revised by us unless Pork Board asks us to, but it's intended to be a living document with further input and discussion and revision if needed or wanted. This is the working group who's had opportunities to read the various versions. It's changed quite a bit from the first version. Really appreciate the input. And it's really helped the evolution of this white paper. But I emphasize, and it says in the white paper, the white paper is the sole responsibility of the authors. None of these people have approved the final draft, but have had opportunities for input and had impact on the document. And as you all know, the U.S. Swine Health Improvement Plan is ongoing, the development of the plan. It's funded by USDA. It's in the process of being established. They have a website. And the U.S. pork production operations can voluntarily enroll in U.S. SHIP to be ASF, CSF monitored, certified before an outbreak occurs and during an outbreak. And the objective of SHIP is to enhance ASF, CSF prevention, response, and recovery through adoption of a voluntary health monitoring and certification structure derived through the input of industry, state, and federal partners. And this white paper presents information that could be considered as the U.S. SHIP plan is being developed and codified into a USDA program. So it's, as the title suggests, factors to consider. The white paper has 4 sections. I went through those in more detail in earlier presentations. This time I'm going to only present big picture items so we have time for discussion. And I realize it's 62 pages long, so many of you may not have had time to read it. There's a 3-page executive summary that contains most of the important information, but the details are found in the paper. So first of all, I'm going to give the big picture overview of sections 1 and 2, the background and factors to consider. And these are factors to consider that make ASF a particularly difficult challenge if we get it in domestic swine in the U.S. And one of those factors is that pigs can be infected for at least 3 days and longer, depending on the route of inoculation, before they show clinical signs or test positive. So we have to count on good biosecurity in addition to surveillance to protect our animals. And even if we test them right before movement, there's still potential that they could be incubating the virus. So biosecurity and surveillance together are key. And our industry is really 2 industries. It's 2 very different segments. 97% of our hog inventory is on about 10,000 operations with greater than 1,000 head. And the vast majority of those are on operations with greater than 5,000 head. However, we have over 50,000 operations in 2017 with less than 100 hogs, and that's less than 1% of the inventory. And the vast majority of those have less than 25 head, according to USDA National Ag Statistics Service in 2015. So these are two very different aspects of the industry that both need to be considered, because 100% of all of the domestic herd has to be negative for ASF for the country to become ASF negative, even if feral swine are still infected. And as everyone knows, we have a lot of feral swine. And these dots show where the intensive swine industry is. Each dot is 20,000 hogs and pigs. Some of that overlaps with the feral swine areas, like in North Carolina, Panhandle of Texas, Oklahoma, and some other areas. But those small operations could be, and probably are, throughout the feral swine area and the non-feral swine area. So that presents some real challenges. And as everyone is aware, control areas will be set up around the infected premises, the known infected premises. And the control area concept was used more than 100 years ago to control the FMD outbreaks we had. And it worked pretty well. But the control areas are established because of local spread of the virus, to monitor for and stop local spread. Back in the early 1900s, when we had FMD, the herds were small, they didn't move very much, so control areas worked pretty well. And we still need control areas. However, long distance spread of swine diseases occurs due to human activity. And this shows in shipment of hogs to a new state for feeding or breeding purposes. And 30 years ago, there weren't that many hogs crossing state lines. And now we have a lot of hogs crossing state lines. And this graph shows the in-shipments of pigs and hogs into state 2021 for feeding or breeding purposes. This doesn't include slaughter. So it's not equally distributed, as you already know. It's going to be a very different problem for these states up here to become ASF free than these states with many fewer in shipments. So we have two different segments of the industry, the intensive and the backyard, and the states are going to have different challenges in becoming ASF free. So how might we approach that? And I'll show this slide now and come back to it later. And this shows market hog inventory for states on December 1st, 2021. And you can see that Iowa and a few other states in the upper Midwest and North Carolina have a lot of inventory of market hogs. This doesn't include the breeding herd. And a lot of in shipments of pigs for feeding and breeding into the upper Midwest. And before these states can be negative, the other states sending pigs and the production system sending pigs into a new state have to be negative for these states up here to be negative and maintain negative status. So in thinking about it, one approach for the small operation is avoid moving animals until they're ready for harvest, unless they're in a state that's stage 4 or 5 ASF free. That would mean not going to fairs or shows, and maybe adapting their production practices so they feed out the pigs that are born. And if they've got small numbers of hogs, they probably can figure out a way to do that. And the Secure Pork Supply Plan has great plans for biosecurity and surveillance and other things. And those are business continuity plans, but not plans for business as usual. Business as usual will not be able to go back to normal until and if we become free. And then for these very large systems, if they have a production system ASF plan for prevention, detection, and eradication of ASF within their system, then these states can have more confidence accepting pigs from those systems. And we'll talk more about the production system ASF plan. Another thing we have to consider is that we have to use validated testing methods if we're going to talk about regaining exports. We have to do that with validated testing methods through the NOAA laboratories. And these are the currently approved validated testing. Before we have an outbreak, it's live sick animals, whole blood, tonsil, spleen, lymph nodes from dead animals. Following confirmation of ASF in the US, blood swabs, spleen swabs, and blood cards can be used for outbreak response and surveillance testing. And during an outbreak, probably we should rapidly get other sample types validated for regulatory use, such as oral fluids and other sample types that are very likely to work quite well. And labs can pool up to 5 equal amounts of blood, tonsil, or spleen swabs from one premises. So that can reduce the number of samples that have to be tested. So surveillance for ASF on swine production sites. And ASF can be high virulence that kills quickly, medium virulence or low virulence that just makes them look sick and they don't really look like African swine fever. So we have to have surveillance that will pick up sick pigs and surveillance that will pick up pigs that die rapidly in the herd. So 2 approaches. One is to participate in the USDA Swine Hemorrhagic Fevers ASF and CSF integrated surveillance plan. And basically, this is having the herd veterinarians submit samples from sick pigs routinely to NOAA labs. The pathologists at the NOAA lab will decide if this could fit ASF clinical signs and go ahead and test them for ASF. So this is ongoing surveillance of sick pigs for ASF. Then another approach for dead pigs, because sometimes ASF kills pigs rapidly, and even before you have an increase in death rate, some pigs could be dying from ASF. That would be testing of pooled blood or spleen swabs from pigs that died of unknown cause. If you know what they died from, they probably wouldn't have to be tested. But if it's an unknown cause, testing blood or spleen swabs. And one thing we could think about is the testing could be on samples archived before the outbreak. So if a production system decides they're going to collect blood and spleen swabs and pool them in 5 per test tube, put them in refrigerator, just in case, then if there's an outbreak, they can pull those swabs from the last 30 to 60 days, have them tested during the 72-hour standstill, and have very good evidence that their system or their site is negative, and allow business continuity sooner. So those are the big items in the background that make this a difficult disease to deal with. So an approach would be designation of ASF status of production sites, production systems, and of states. So first of all, designation of the ASF status of production sites. Sites that have an infected animal would be ASF infected production sites. And those sites have a confirmed case, confirmed initially at Faddle and after a while, probably with the non-lab confirmation. And that site needs to be depopulated. And depending on where we're at in the outbreak and the characteristics of the virus, Perhaps controlled marketing could be used if there's great confidence that certain segments are negative, and virus eliminated. So depopulate, eliminate virus, and then consider repopulation. Then there are all the sites that don't have a positive ASF test, but have not had time to meet the conditions necessary to be considered an ASF check-free swine production site. So they're no positive test, but they're in the process of doing what they need to do to show that they're ASF checked. So an ASF checked-free swine production site has implemented the secure pork supply plan, all the different aspects. They have surveillance and movement data available to share with the SAHO and USDA. They've conducted ASF testing of pigs that have died or are clinically ill of unknown cause for at least 60 days with negative results. Maybe 30 days is long enough, that should be discussed. The incubation period is 15 days, one incubation period. And they did that by participating in the USDA Swine Hemorrhagic Fever's ASF and CSF integrated surveillance plan, testing of pooled swabs from dead pigs, and these could be swabs, samples archived before the outbreak. And then once the US SHIP plan is up and running, the surveillance that finally agreed to in the US SHIP plan. And the site only receives swine from other production sites that are ASF check free, so they aren't likely to be introducing ASF. And then an ASF checked free swine production system has a production system ASF plan in place, and all the swine production sites in the system are ASF checked free. So the production system ASF plans should have a plan for ASF prevention, detection, and eradication within their system. Needs to include biosecurity, secure pork supply plan biosecurity. Optimally, should quarantine newly arrived animals for 30 days, and they could do that by all in, all out per building with very good biosecurity between buildings. Surveillance testing, and this way, if the building breaks, hopefully they can just deal with that one building and not the whole site or system. The surveillance testing according to the USDA hemorrhagic fevers plan and testing of dead pigs. Animal identification by group, so they know where all their animals are and where they're going. Movement tracing, depopulation, how are they going to handle that? Maybe include control marketing with permission. How are they going to dispose of infected carcasses and contaminated materials? How do they plan to eliminate virus, recover free status, and restock? So that could all go into a production system ASF plan. The production system should submit its plan to SAHOs in the states they operate in or use packing plants in. They should also make their plan available to USDA and perhaps the packing plants they utilize, especially if we're going to go with export certified packing plants. SAHOs and USDA may not have the resources to evaluate the production system ASF plan. However, templates could be developed for production systems to follow to develop their plan and modify to their specific situation. An acceptable plan would follow the pre-agreed upon template. So putting the swine production system in charge of ensuring with a high degree of confidence and transparency that their system is protected from ASF and that all animals entering the system, moving between sites in the system, and leaving the system are negative for ASF should facilitate business continuity for the production system and remove some burden from states so they can focus on other swine premises and movements. An observation made during the current HPA outbreak as compared to 2015 has been that testing, depopulation, carcass disposal, and virus elimination went more smoothly with less disruptions when the production systems were prepared to manage and conduct these activities under the supervision of federal and state authorities rather than bringing in outside contractors. And perhaps if there's an interest in this approach, U.S. SHIP could incorporate production system ASF plan. So then designation by states. And of course, currently we've been historically free of ASF forever. The first case of ASF in the US, we lose this historical freedom. And the emergency response will be based on the USDA ASF Red Book and control areas around infected premises. If this succeeds, which hopefully it will, if it succeeds in eradicating ASF from both domestic and feral swine, then we recover ASF-free status for the U.S. in all suids, feral and domestic, 3 months after disinfection of the last infected establishment, and using sentinel pigs to document that. Then USDA works to reestablish exports and all of swine and all products from swine, according to the Industrial Animal Health Code. If the emergency response does not succeed in eradicating ASF, ASF becomes endemic in feral swine and continues in domestic swine, then we could potentially initiate a state-based ASF eradication plan in domestic swine and concurrently work to reestablish exports of fresh pork according to the WOHA Terrestrial Animal Health Code Article 15.1.15, which we'll talk about. So the state-based ASF eradication plan, the initial response didn't get rid of it. We start a state-based plan. ASF affected states that we know are infected could go through some stages. First, initiating control. Second stage would be testing all swine premises before movement. Third stage could be testing all herds in the state periodically. And in the white paper, there's several bullet points under each of these stages that can be discussed. After stage 3, then hopefully they could move to ASF monitored state 3 with no positive tests for 60 days with adequate testing. The states with unknown ASF status, in other words, they have no positive tests, but they haven't done enough surveillance to move to stage 4. So with adequate surveillance that's briefly discussed in the white paper, and no positive tests for 60 days, they move to stage 4, ASF monitored state 3. Then after 12 months, a year of being in stage 4, well, 10 months after being in stage 4, they move to stage 5. They've been free for a year. Once all 50 states have been free for a year, then we go back to US free of ASF in domestic swine, but not necessarily feral swine. At any one of these stages, if the state detects an ASF infection, they go back to one of these 3 stages and work towards freedom again. So this is it's going to be difficult to get states, if our feral swine are positive and other states are positive, to get states, all states up to ASF freedom. So we need a way to focus on production sites and systems, get them free, and then work towards free states. So everyone should have confidence that swine from these sources are ASF free. A production site that's ASF checked free, production system with an acceptable plan and no positive tests, a state that is in stage 4 or stage 5. We We need to build those so we can have confidence they're free. And then we're back to this slide again. In order for the states with a lot of in-shipments to be free, all of those in-shipments need to be free. And then they need to show that all the premises in the states are free. So with time, as these states down here become ASF free, stage 4 or stage 5, they can be sending pigs to these states that receive a lot of pigs with confidence they're not sending ASF. And as the production systems have their plan in place with a lot of surveillance and biosecurity and things are going well, no positive tests, they can be sending their hogs to these states that receive a lot of hogs. Because until that happens, these states really can't have much confidence that they're free when they're receiving pigs that we aren't confident are free. So we've got two very different components of the production and very different state situations that need to be accommodated. And we can come back and talk about this. Now I want to talk about the approaches to regaining pork exports during an eradication program. And this is something you're all familiar with, that pork exports have greatly increased in the last 30 years and become a very important part of our pork industry. In 1990, we imported more than we exported, and for a few years there. So if we lost exports at this point, it wouldn't be a big deal. And we weren't supplying very much of the world's pork through export. But the industry has been very successful in increasing exports, producing high quality, inexpensive pork. So then now we supply about a third of the world's pork exports. And it's very important to our industry. So if we lose all exports, much of the world is going to be short on pork, and the industry is going to take a very big financial hit. So we need to try and get back to exporting at least some pork as quickly as we can. And the Terrestrial Animal Health Code has a lot of sections on that. You can establish zones, you can establish compartments. All of those will be very difficult considering the current industry in the US with how much movement there is. We have to have that movement to get the pigs to where the capability of raising them and slaughtering them is. So we can't just stop moving them from the big production systems. But there is one other potential, establishing export certified swine packing plants that does have some potential in the US. So that's the one I'll briefly talk about. The Terrestrial Animal Health Code, Article 15.1.15, provides an option unique to ASF, it isn't in there for CSF or FMD, for the export of fresh meat of domestic pigs from a country that is not free of ASF. And significantly, meat means all edible parts of an animal. And as I'm sure you're all aware, we export a lot of edible parts to other countries that we don't really eat in this country. So being able to export those is very important. A packing plant operating as described in this article may be qualified to export fresh meat to willing trading partners. If the trading partner doesn't want it, there's no way. But if they want it and need it, perhaps we can establish a way to do it. As with all other approaches to regaining exports, this will require bilateral negotiations with a willing trading partner, meaning that if they are positive and want to export to us, they meet the exact same requirements, we'd be willing to do that. Unlike the other approaches to regaining exports, a single case of ASF in the country, zone, or compartment would not necessarily result in loss of the ability to export fresh meat from that packing plant. And this is the article 15.1.15. And our chief veterinary officer would need to present an international certificate attesting that the entire consignment of fresh meat comes from animals which originated from herds in which surveillance in accordance with the code demonstrates no case of ASF has occurred in the past 3 years. This period can be reduced to 12 months when the surveillance demonstrates there is no evidence of tick involvement. And most people anticipate we won't have tick involvement, not at least at the beginning. And in addition, samples from a statistically representative number of animals were tested with negative results. The entire consignment has to come from an approved slaughterhouse subjected to favorable results to anti and post-mortem inspections, and that happens all the time. And necessary precautions have been taken after slaughter to avoid contact of the fresh meat with any source of ASF. And the packing plants have pretty good tracking to be able to do that. So the sentence that says surveillance demonstrates no case of ASF has occurred in the past 12 months. Will we have to wait 12 months? The U.S. is currently historically free of ASF. After the first case, this designation is lost. ASF checked free designation for a production site, production system, or state requires, if we decide to require it, adequate surveillance and no positive tests for 60 days. So if a production system before the outbreak has ongoing participation in the swine hemorrhagic fevers integrated surveillance plan to pick up any sick pigs that might have ASF, and if they've been pooling samples from every pig that died of unknown causes, maybe just in the building that's shipping pigs, maybe on the whole site. And then during the 72-hour standstill, they submit them for testing to show that they haven't been infected for the last 60 days, and we were historically free before that. Maybe that would be enough to give our chief veterinary officer confidence that these animals are free and give the importing partner confidence. Surveillance before testing before movement. Don't ship any animals from a building with increased incidence of dead or clinically ill animals with unexplained cause. So if that's happening, there needed to be diagnostics done. So any animals shipped aren't coming from increased incidence of sick or dead pigs. Routine submission of clinically ill animals to non-labs for hemorrhagic fevers integrated surveillance plan. PCR testing of spleen swabs or blood swabs for all animals up to 5 samples pooled that died in the building of unknown causes in the 2 to 4 weeks prior to shipping. And this is as the outbreak is ongoing. It's ongoing. We're not talking about the first 60 days. This should minimize chances an ASF infected animal will arrive at a packing. Collecting swabs from dead animals, the Certified Swine Sample Collector Program has training on how to do that. Those animals have to be handled anyway, and it wouldn't be too big of an issue for routinely doing that and archiving those samples. So all hogs for processing at a packing plant come from ASF-checked free swine production sites, swine production systems with an ASF plan, or states in stage 4 or 5 ASF monitored free. So the question then is, will this provide the USDA and a willing trading partner enough confidence that the fresh meat from a packing plant meets the requirements of the Terrestrial Animal Health Code? And just as a reminder of our exports, our top export markets, China has been, now that they're getting their swine production back, it's dropping. Japan and Mexico, Canada are top export markets. And it may be that a country that already has ASF and our pork prices have dropped, their pork prices have increased, they might be interested in importing our pork under conditions where everybody has confidence the meat is free. If we're positive, there's a pretty good chance Mexico and perhaps Canada will be positive also. Maybe some of these other countries would be willing to, but we need to have a lot of discussion before an outbreak. So next steps. As I mentioned, the grad period ended, so we submitted the final draft of this paper, but it's not the last word. This needs to be discussed and modified or different plans developed. The pork board has said they consider this to be a living document, so it's not the final word. Need to share the final draft of the white paper with a broader group for more discussion. We plan to put it up on our website and let people know it's there. Further discussion on Section 4, approaches to gaining pork exports during eradication program, needs a lot of input from USDA Import, Export, North American Meat Institute, and the packers. And shortly after we submitted the final copy of the white paper, Dr. Miriam Martin submitted a really nice section of changes and edits to Section 4. So this continued discussion is already ongoing and needs a lot more discussion. So that part needs a lot of discussion, and that's continuing. I am willing to provide a webinar for other groups if interested, and you can contact me with comments and suggestions or contact the National Pork Board.